Thank you and welcome. We're still admitting some people, but I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. My name is Gwendolyn Hall-Smith. I'm with Vermonters for a New Economy. We do advocacy work to create a just and sustainable economy in Vermont. If we were meeting in Vermont right now, we begin with a land acknowledgement to honor the indigenous Abenaki people who stewarded the land here for thousands of years before the European colonizers arrived, and the Black people we enslaved to build the United States. Since this is an international gathering, we'd like to encourage you to find out who the indigenous peoples are where you live. All over the world, white colonizers have crushed indigenous traditional ways, oppressed and killed indigenous people, and imposed our unjust and unsustainable economic structures on places where a more healthy and resilient pattern of economic relationships thrived that was based on real human needs and reverence for the natural world. So with that, I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar and turn it over to Mike Sandler, who's with FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gwen. My name is Mike Sandler. I'm a trustee with FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. It's a nonprofit group that was founded about 20 years ago by Richard Douthwaite, who you may know is an economist and systems thinker in Ireland, along with a number of other activists. They have a number of projects going on, one of which I want to mention, it's called Cap Global Carbon, which deals with climate change and economics. And the word FASTA is an Irish word meaning henceforth or in the future. And the word was contained in the first line of a poem called The Lament for Kilcash, where the quote they say is, "What will we do without wood now that the last of the forests are down?" So it has a sustainability and resilience aspect that we're looking to promote here in the US and Canada. And this is one of the first programs that we've been part of here on this side of the Atlantic. So we're happy to be working with Gwen's group and also the Pot of Gold podcast. And their hosts, Mel and Steph, will take it from here. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Thanks.
Hello, everyone.
My name is Mel Wymore.
And I'm Stephanie Overback.
And we are the co-hosts of the Pot of Gold podcast, as Mike just said. Our podcast is about interviewing economic innovators around the world who are working for just and sustainable planet. And we have an amazing panel of guests today to talk about universal basic income. If you didn't hear our show or the webinar last week on May 10th, we covered the basics of universal basic income and some of the experiments that have been going on around the world, especially in Finland. Today we have back Maruka Turunen, who can answer questions about that. But today we're planning on focusing a little bit more in depth on the question of UBI. The first question being, is UBI truly a disruptor of the status quo? And if so, how? And if not, how can we make it a disruptor of the status quo to address inequality and climate change? And then the second question are, what are the impacts of UBI, positive and negative? And the third question is, what do we need to do to get to UBI on a wide scale level? So Stephanie's going to go through some ground rules for this webinar, and then we'll jump right in.
So first of all, thank everyone to be here. It's great to see you all, and especially for the panelists. I see that Herbert actually joined us too from Namibia. I think I see him somewhere, maybe one of the team members. Gwen, maybe you can pin him up on the panelist thing. So just before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted. You are more than welcome to pose questions, preferably in the chat. If you have a specific question to a specific panelist, such as, for example, Maruka, then say Maruka, your question and your name, and just pose it. We are going to record all the questions. We will probably not be able to answer all the questions, but we will answer all, and we will pass these questions on to all the panelists and then publish and come back to you for sure. In case we have a Zoom troll, those trolls also get the links. They can sign up just in case we have one. Just keep calm. We try to handle this as soon as possible, and we keep on rolling. So we hope it's all clear, and we have reduced the opportunity for those people to come into those Zoom rooms. And then last but not least, this is going to be recorded, and we're going to probably produce some episodes out of it, and everything is going to be published on our Patreon site, which is a wonderful community. Actually, Scott has invited us to use Patreon, and we are now launching a Patreon site, or have launched it, and so also on our podcast, which is available on most of the platforms. So let's get into the introduction rounds. Is there anyone of you panelists who would like to start, who feels like starting is a good thing for today? If not, I'm gonna pick someone.
Scott's coming on. Scott, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this today. And so a little bit about me. I'm on the board of directors of the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, and I'm also serving as a senior advisor to Humanity Forward. Both are nonprofit organizations focused around the idea of basic income and making it happen. And I've also crowdfunded my own basic income and have been living with one since January of 2016. So I even kind of know what it feels like to have this feeling of monthly economic security. And really experiencing that really made a difference for me to understand just how little security people have out there right now. And one of the reasons why basic income would be such a big difference is because of that. And yeah, I got into the idea of basic income back in 2013 and have been researching it and writing about it and advocating for it since then. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and answer any questions.
Wonderful. Welcome, Scott. Enno, how about you? Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks for having me. So, well, my name is Enno Schmidt, and I started the Initiative for Basic Income in Switzerland. You may have heard about the referendum in 2016. We started 2006 to work on it, and then have had the People's Initiative and then the referendum. And because we created huge, big pictures, images like 8 million real money coins, 5-centime coins, dropped on the pavement in front of the Federal Palace, the Americans started the discussion again. They needed a picture. They forgot that they have had this discussion, but then with these amazing images, it was funny for me and interesting to see how it spread then in the medias and so on and so on. And then Scott came, and then it became big in the US. So, well, that's my primarily work, 10 years for basic income, and I produced and made the film Basic Income and Cultural Impulse, which was very influential all over the world because it was translated in many languages and so on. I traveled then 2 years around the world, spreading the happy message, and currently I'm engaged, full employed at the University of Freiburg in Germany, where there's a new chair for basic income and an institute, Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies, where I cooperate and build up teams, international teams for researching basic income. So for me, the most important point, and also because you mentioned it, whether it is a game changer or not, is for me that this has to come from the people in your freedom and not by any need. So important for us was to bring up this topic on a level which is not primarily money. It is change of understanding what economy is, family is, partnership is, all that. Unconditional is the point. Basic income is not so interesting because we have a basic income more or less. It's just not unconditional. So the psychological aspect, the cultural aspect of this change to an unconditional is what is important for me. And what I think made that radiation and power of the initiative in Switzerland, because people say, well, Swiss people, basic income, why? They are rich. So yes, by money, but not by soul, brain. And we all need to go in the future to become much more sensible than we are, much more sensible by all the people around us, the nature, the planet, and so on and so on. And this is my big concern in regard to COVID, that COVID brings this discussion into, oh yeah, necessary, we need it. There is need, hardship, we have to do this. This is the old understanding of social benefit and social benefit security, and that always does not lead to a better society, but more to split the society. That's what we see 100 years now. And so my statement is basic income is freedom for people, and it has to be done by the people and not by the government.
Wonderful. Thank you, Enno. Let's go up the Rhine towards Belgium. Well, you're not in Belgium currently, Michelle, but it would be nice to hear your introduction.
Yes, hello to everybody. I live in northern Thailand, Chiang Mai, so everybody knows it. So I'm the founder of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, and our two key concepts are the commons and peer-to-peer dynamics. And with the commons, we mean shared resources. And with peer-to-peer, we mean this freedom that we have to connect all over the world and create not just local communities, but virtual communities. And so I look at UBI from a point of view of the commons. So what does that mean? So we need to transition, we need to mutualize resources, because it's the only way, the only human institution which has been able for thousands of years to maintain resources at a stable level, whereas markets and states are extractive regimes. And so now that we have a world crisis of resource overuse, the idea that we need to reinstitute the commons at the core of our society is very, very important. And so what is UBI in that context? Well, it's something that gives you security to do transition. My conviction is that there are a lot of people who would like to do good stuff, work for organic food, work for renewable energy, but they're in a situation of personal insecurity. And so they're just not able to take the risk. So for me, that's the primary idea of UBI, is UBI as a transition income, as something that will give much more many people the inner freedom to say, yeah, I'm going to engage for that because I know that I'm safe. And it's a big difference. I live in Thailand, where there's still quite a bit of commoning in the family, but also in the tribes that live around the city here. And it's very different psychologically. Like, if everybody has a private garden, something goes wrong in your garden, you're in trouble. But if you have an understanding with your neighbors that if your garden is in trouble, you can, pull on the collective resource of all the other gardens, then you feel safe. So that's for me what UBI does. Maybe one more argument is, so in the commons, we think not about commodity economy, but about contributions economy. So in other words, what we have to account for is not just a scarce good that has a market price, but anything that makes us collectively better or wealthier, whatever you want to call it. And so we have to recognize positive contributions and negative contributions, like negative impact on the environment. And so in that philosophy, what you would say is that UBI is a recognition that every human being contributes to society just by being there. They take care of their children, they may take care of their parents, they may garden, but just by being a human, you're recognized for your contribution. So it's not a free lunch. I don't see UBI as saying, everybody needs like a charity. No, it's because we know that as a human being, you contribute to the collective, and we want to honor that as a society. Should I say a bit more about the game change, or is that for after?
Let's do that after. Yeah.
Let's do
okay.
this.
So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Michelle.
To the beginning.
Welcome. Let's stay in Europe. Maruka, even further up north, Finland. Please introduce yourself quickly. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maruka Turunen, and I come from Helsinki, Finland. It's very rainy here today, but I have been working in the social insurance institution in Finland for over 20 years, so I'm very familiar with all the basic social security benefits and services that we provide for customers. I'm currently working as a leading expert, for example, coordinating the work of the social security reform ongoing here in Finland. So that's really interesting to see how do we can shape the future social security system by this work that is ongoing for 8 years. So it's going past government. So it's really important that we do it systematically and think about this thoroughly. Perhaps why I'm here, I was leading the implementation project on the basic income experiment here in Finland that took place on 2017 and 18. And as I told you last week, the main results from the experiments were that people were less stressed with this basic income. They could free themselves from worrying about their money side of the situation in their lives. So that gave us a lot of good information. How should we shape this kind of thing? So the same amount of money always at the same time per month, unconditionally, was the clue in this basic income experiment, although we had other benefits. So it's not kind of like the idea was not that we could replace all the other benefits with this basic income. But I think that the good results were that, and the one that we did not get from the basic income experiment here in Finland was that it did not seem to be a mechanism that people would take on work more actively or more eagerly than with the basic unemployment benefits. So that did not increase the incentive for work. But I think the mental side that, as the other panelists say, is a very, very important thing. Nice to be here.
So much learned from Finland, and we're so grateful for your work, Maruka. We have one more panelist coming all the way from Namibia, and that is Herbert Jauch. Herbert, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Herbert. I'm from the Economic and Social Justice Trust in Namibia, but spent most of the last 30 years in the trade unions, the labor movement of the country. And we were part of the basic income grant campaign and the pilot project that was run in Namibia some 10 years ago. Our conditions were a bit different. I fully understand and appreciate the points made by the previous speaker. But in Namibia, the idea of what we call the basic income grant, you call it UIB, but it's the same concept, came about as a country that's deeply shaped by a colonial legacy, by racism and extreme forms of inequality. Together with South Africa, Namibia is ranked amongst the most unequal countries in the world. And that has remained so 30 years after independence. And so the question was, for many years, having adopted these market-driven policies, having played along with the Western prescriptions at the time of independence, what can be done in Namibia to make a dent in these absurd levels of inequality that we are having? And the UIB, as you call it, was then one of the interventions that was first proposed by the NAMTAX Commission, a Namibian government-appointed tax commission, that said that would be one intervention to immediately have an impact on poverty and inequality in Namibia. When the government didn't act on the recommendation, we formed a large coalition consisting of the churches, non-governmental organizations, trade unions, youth organizations, etc., to say, we are convinced that we need a BIG to put an end to the debilitating and a form of enslavement that poverty is, to enable an emancipatory approach, particularly towards Black workers and particularly women workers who faced abhorrent working conditions and who needed a chance to get out of it. And as we speak now, our unemployment is around 40%, and 75% of people earning wages in Namibia earn around, that would be in US dollars, around $800 80 US dollars a month, 80 to 90 US dollars, with costs of living that are nowhere near to be covered. So in Namibia, it was an attempt to break the shackles of poverty, to enable people through at least a guaranteed income to move beyond the slave wage economy and to have systematic redistributive interventions. intervention. The obstacle we encountered were from our own political elite that said, well, giving money to people for nothing just makes them lazy. So Michel's philosophical understanding of building a new society and what other speakers have alluded to has completely bypassed our economic elite. Now, with the COVID crisis having made the overall social and economic crisis worse, government is now considering a basic income or UIB, but only for the poor. So they haven't even understood the importance of universality. So we're still facing an uphill battle, despite having had probably one of globally the most successful pilot projects, when one village in Namibia, we implemented the BIG for 2 years with amazing results in terms of social cohesion, in terms of economic upliftment, gender equality, dropping crime rates, etc. Despite this empirical evidence, we're still facing an uphill battle, but I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Herbert. It sounds like there's been a lot going on in Namibia around this question for a while now. And that is a great transition for us to move into our first organizing question, and that is UBI a game changer, and will it change the status quo? Yes, and if no, how can we make it change the status quo? And I'm going to start with Scott. I know you've already spoken on this a little bit, but Scott, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, so I would like to just simply describe UBI as the power to say no and the freedom to say yes. And that's what we lack right now. So by power to say no, it's transformative in that people don't have the ability to say no right now. And in fact, you see people afraid of that right now. Like you see people panicking in the US about the unemployment insurance boost and the stimulus checks. And they're saying, oh my gosh, like people aren't returning to work. And then because of that, you see people, see places raising their wages because they are discovering that if they raise wages, then they're able to find workers. So like, it's funny to me that anyone could think it's not transformative if there's a ginormous fear about that. And it should be like, we should want people to be able to refuse to work. And so that's the fear aspect of, oh my gosh, people will stop working. But as long as people have to accept employment, then they lack bargaining power. They lack the ability to demand a certain high enough wage. They demand certain benefits and working conditions and hours. Like they are disempowered, and those who are, I would say, in power, that they want it to stay that way. So yes, it would be transformative to actually provide people that power and to make sure that people can actually determine what conditions they will work under. And on the flip side of that, when I say the freedom to say yes, right now, if you look at, say, volunteering and especially, so like when it comes to volunteering and unpaid care work or unpaid work of any kind, you really essentially have to be able to afford to do that. Like it's not really an option if you can't afford to. So there's a lot of really important, valuable work out there that's not being done because people can't afford to do it because they lack the income to do it. And if people have that ability, then they will pursue that work. And again, when it comes to unpaid care work too, and this is actually part of the real story as to people right now not returning to work at the rates that people would like. Would like to see the unemployment rate drop down much more. And what they're finding is that, I mean, essentially a lot of women needed to drop out of the labor market in order to focus on unpaid care work during the pandemic. And, schools were closed, and still a lot of schools remain closed in the US, and we don't have any kind of child care system in the US at the national level. And so a lot of people, especially women, but also men, but a lot of people lack the ability to choose to even go back to work if they wanted to, in as terms of employment goes, because they can't afford to again. Like they're having to actually focus on that unpaid work. So I think that we should actually support, recognize, and enable all unpaid work, and I think that would be transformative. So yeah, for those two main reasons, and this goes into the unconditionality aspect of it and the universality, like those are key transformative principles, because there are no conditions applied to it and everyone receives it. And also you could see even the difference between stimulus checks and UBI in the US, because it was targeted. And so again, like what was just mentioned in Namibia, there's a lack of understanding of the importance of universality. And when the stimulus checks went out, a lot of people didn't get them that should have gotten them, even because they were utilizing data from previous tax years. So like you're saying, oh, well, let's make sure that those earning under $75,000 get this. And then at the same time, they're ignoring the fact that people are currently earning under $75,000, but the government thinks that they aren't because of their previous earnings from the previous years. So I think it's even in this context in the pandemic, we should recognize that a fully universal unconditional system would be transformative. The fact that it reaches everyone, it empowers everyone, and it enables everyone to pursue the work that's most important to them.
Enno, I think you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I want to try to say something. I'm not sure whether I can bring it over. So the idea of an unconditional basic income, and Scott described it very well. Unconditional for everybody. Everybody is equal. And just a little story. A friend of mine, activist in China for basic income, said, well, this is or would be the first time that the people feel they are equal. And they start to feel it in China because of COVID, because everybody is dying by COVID, also the ministers. So equality as a holy point of human beings. So we are all different. That is one point, but we are all human beings. That is the equality. But what I want to say is the idea is so great. But don't forget that everything depends on who is introducing it, how it is introduced and implemented. So everything depends on what we are doing. And that is what I see, that this idea is so wonderful. It's like democracy. It's the same idea like democracy in another time. And now it's targeted to the human right of economic security or just the human right to live. But everything depends on who is implementing it and how it is implemented. And that is the difference between game change and not game change. And you see the difference, or you see how shocking and interrupting it is that, for example, people are asking whether those with a basic income will still work. Well, what an understanding of work is that? We are still living, be honest, in an understanding of work which is slavery. That's not so bad, slavery was normal over thousands of years, but this is slavery. Do what you are paid for, and the incentive for working is being paid. So this makes a split between people in the world, split between your faith and what you are doing. So, and this is not helpful. The book Bullshit Jobs from David Graeber, which is great, and I experienced it too. All this ordered work is, half of it is meaningless. And when we are talking about work, still people are thinking, oh, employment. Employment is nothing. Work is what you are doing in your life. And when your life makes sense, then because you are doing good things for others, and that's work. So the point is to bring the human being in the middle, and everything is coming from there. But we are used to think in monarchy structures. It was God, then it was the emperor, or now it's the employer who is holy and knows what is best for you, and he says you what to do. And we are no longer in that time, and that is a catastrophe. So the catastrophe of our times is much more a cultural catastrophe than any other one, and any other catastrophes are resulting on it, that we are not changing our understanding and behavior like it is necessary to be in our current time. And basic income is the idea to do that. And this is the reality of basic income, unconditional basic income at the first place, not calculating the money. So the money is there because we have a basic income already. We just change it in the unconditional. That's what I wanted to point out, that we don't forget everything depends on who and how it's implemented.
Yeah, implementation is everything, but I love the idea that we're really transforming what it means to work, or what we think about work, rather than just, as you said, the money. Maruka, you have some way to explain to us whether UBI has been a game changer in Finland, or if it wasn't, how could you make it so?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think that the idea is a game changer, and it's a really brilliant idea. And Scott and Enno explained that. I think that that's the thing that I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking of also about the work, because as Enno, you said, I agree that we do have. Our legislation, all our structures go from there, that we see it from the organization side or employer side. It's employer's market nowadays, so you do what's kind of like possible to do, and you take on work from that point of view. We don't think about the person behind there, or he or she should be in the middle, as you, Enno, said. And we need to have more information from the customer situation, so that we can actually see more precisely their needs. What do they actually need, and not go like our structures tell that if you don't take on this work, you will get punished for that one, and then wait for another one. And we don't see actually, well, our customers are in wrong processes and on the wrong benefits, and they don't know what to apply for, and it's very complex situation, and we need to simplify that. And this basic income, of course, is one of the ways to do that. And I think that we should, whether it's basic income or not, we should have one combined benefit for all the people that are in need of that comes always at the same time per month, and they can be sure of that no matter what they do, even if they don't take on work or they don't go and study or activate themselves. And then another thing I have to say this, I think that we need to focus more on the mental health services also, because there are lots of people who, cope with their work and stay on their jobs and on their studies if they get psychotherapy or something like that. We in Finland see that very clearly, because the amount of customers receiving the psychotherapy services per year is going way high all the time within the past 10 years, and it's giving help for lots of people, and they kind of like can cope with their lives better and are capable of doing their jobs if they, and many of them want to do their jobs. So I'm sorry I talked too much, but
no, not at all, not at all. Michelle, I think you had something to say about the game changes you want to say in the introduction. So can you chime in here? Thank you, Maruka.
Well, actually had a question for Mayuka also, because it seemed to me that the Finnish project was actually not an unconditional basic income. It was designed for people without a job to incentivize them, and so in that context, it was seen negatively because it didn't, reach that aim. But it wasn't. I think it wasn't the real unconditional basic income. So my point will be in terms of game changer, maybe to, on the one hand, just echo what Scott said, that I think, yes, in terms of the balance of power between workers and owners of capital, it seemed to me that giving a basic income would really change the game and give. So when I talk about peer production in the commons, it's about passionate engagement first. So people choose what they want to contribute to, and then they create like a peer production community, like in open source and free software, and then they look for how can we make a living for this. And so in that sense, the basic income is like a real help, to do these kinds of transition to passionate work that is also good for humanity. I have one question that is a fear that many people on the left have who critique the basic income, and that is the following. So if you have a low basic income, will that not function as a subsidy for the employers? And there is a historical precedent. If you read Karl Polanyi, The Great Transformation, he talks about the Speenhamland system, which existed at the end of the 18th century. And the way it worked was that in the parishes, they would give money to the farmers who did not have enough to buy food. So the difference between the wages and the price of bread was the basic income, if you like. And the result was, of course, that the employers would count on it. So that's about how big is that basic income. That will have an effect on that dynamic, and maybe Scott can say something about that if he, I haven't thought that out completely, but I know it's a frequent critique. Yeah, so I think for the moment that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Maruka, did you want to respond quickly about the unconditionality?
Yes, thanks. I would. The unconditional, the basic income in this Finnish experiment, it was like we called it the partial basic income. It was totally unconditional for these 2,000 people who were selected to this experiment. So they did not have to do anything in order to get it. Of course, we picked these people up from the unemployment benefit receivers. So it was the basis were there, and the control group was also the people who were receiving basic unemployment benefit. But they got this 560 euros per month unconditionally, whether they took on work or not. But the aim, one of the goals was to see if this kind of mechanism increases the incentive for people to take on work, and it did not seem to do that.
Right. Oh, thank you, Maruka. Okay, Scott, actually, Michelle asked you a question, and Herbert will come to you right after Scott.
Yeah, so when it comes to the wage subsidy stuff, again, I say power to say no and freedom to say yes. And if you keep that in mind, then even like any amount of non-zero unconditionality of income increases your bargaining power. So yes, you can use a small amount, say $500 per month, in order to accept a job that could potentially lower its wages, and this would be essentially subsidizing the employer. But why would you do that if the job was something that you didn't want? So if you look at it that way, then say, employers offering, work that people don't want to do, they're the ones who are, you're not going to subsidize those. Like most likely it's going to work the opposite way, and they're going to need to increase their wages in order to get people to say yes to them. But on the other hand, yes, it is possible that you could subsidize work, but it's more likely that the work you would subsidize is the stuff that actually people want. So let's say, you see this right now, like in the nonprofit sector versus the for-profit sector, where people are earning less in nonprofits overall. And part of it is because they feel that they're doing something meaningful, that there's something extra of value besides just the wage for the reason that they're doing it. So when it comes to that kind of thing, we could subsidize that. And I think that's a good thing. Like if we could actually make it so that more people would choose work that's especially meaningful, helpful to the communities, and they could actually create more of those jobs because they could afford to do that, then I agree that's a good thing. So I think there's kind of that split where you're going to see increased wages for stuff that people don't like, and potentially decreased wages or no difference for stuff that people do really like. And again, that includes unpaid work as well, so that people would actually choose to do that.
Yeah.
And I actually it's really interesting to look at Speenhamland even. That's like a whole other discussion too, but it's not as simple as a lot of people think it is. It's pretty messy as far as how it was implemented. It was like it was kind of like basic income in certain cases, and it was kind of like more of a guaranteed minimum income in other cases, which was effectively 100% tax rate or 100% marginal tax rate, as in, you'd lose it upon accepting employment. So like there's a mix of things there. And also I would just say, when it comes to Finland, I just want to mention that it was really interesting to me how it was like a clear experiment as far as unconditionality, because there was a group receiving traditional unemployment income, and then there was the experimental group that received the same amount of income but without conditions. So the first group would lose the income, with accepting work, and the second group would keep the income with accepting work. And Finland wanted to know if that would incentivize work, and it did slightly. But I think most of the difference when it comes to work, this is like a macroeconomic picture. So, if you really wanted to see more jobs being available and people picking those jobs, then you would need to actually provide people enough money at a universal level so that they're spending the money, and then that spending creates jobs, and then more jobs are available, and then that creates more employment opportunities. And it also point to in Stockton, like people were worried that a $500 per month basic income in Stockton would be too small, and that you could have that kind of similar impact. And instead, you saw that not only unemployment went down, and also full-time employment was double for recipients compared to increased by twice as much for recipients compared to the control group who didn't receive it. And like in one story is to kind of understand how that happened, was that people were able to use that just $500 per month to essentially pay for the time to go look for that better job. So like if they didn't have that, then they would have had to stay in their low paying job. But because they had that, they were able to take time off work and then go apply for that and interview for that next job and get it. And then now they actually shifted to a higher paying form of work. And you saw that actually in the canceled Ontario experiment too, that I wish would have continued. But from surveys showed that people did end up in earning higher wages in better jobs. So I think that's important.
Herbert, you wanted to chime in before. Are you still having a question, holding a question?
Yes, I would like to comment on some of the points that Scott and also Michelle made. Is that all right? What Scott called the power to say no, that's truly one of the most important and transformative effects. And it is directly linked to the question of moving beyond wage labor, moving beyond the logic of capital that has provided the definition of work. Now, in countries that have very neocolonial economic structures like ours, the danger is if you only introduce a UIB or basic income grant, as we call it here, and all these structures remain unchanged, you might end up precisely what Michelle alluded to, that employers will justify these starvation wages on the basis of, yeah, but people are getting the UIB on top of that. So there is no need for us to improve the wages. That is a real danger. And therefore, with your initial question, how can a UIB disrupt the status quo? That is the central question. Now, there I would argue we need to go beyond only the UIB. We need to start changing economic structures in order to avoid the ecological catastrophe that's by now very clear, that you cannot continue with this kind of accumulation by dispossession and this highly destructive form of neoliberal global capitalism. And we shouldn't de-link the question of UIB from those structural questions. And then I think if we do that, if we dismantle a system that has led to this ecological and social catastrophe, then Scott's point that he made right now, that a UIB will then have a positive, not only emancipatory effect, but would also allow work that's not recognized now to gain in status, because a UIB allows people to do that. I think these two need to go together. Thank you.
Enno, you wanted to chime in here.
Yeah, I think this is very important what you just said, whether first there is an unconditional basic income and people are more than today enabled to do those things they appreciate, they value, to strengthen the people, or whether we link this with all the other topics we know already. My suggestion is to not to do that, because we are waiting on changing structures in the economy. We are waiting on, we are fighting for. So that makes, from me, the unconditional basic income weak. And I'm a little bit thinking that understanding the idea of a basic income is to understand that this is focusing human being, individual, strengthen them. And all the other things are results of that. So what we have is that people cannot do so much things, and we don't change the situations. We are fighting against poverty, and poverty is rising. We are fighting for that, and for that, people has no time, no power to do that. So my suggestion is not to link this to anything, but to believe in human beings, in people, that the people will do it. Otherwise, you are very quickly in the position that you are the same like all the people from the left side or so on. They have huge, big models of what is right to do. So they are deciding about others in another way, what they should do and how it should be. Unconditional basic income is revolutionary because it does not tell the people what to do. And it's not so bad if wages are decreasing, you know. Remember that unconditional basic income is for everybody. It is not just for the poor. It is not just to hire the income of those who have too little. It is for everybody. And you need something, whether it is inflation, hopefully not, or whether it is that paid work will decrease in the price. And that is good, because the proportion of payment for work is decreasing. The proportion of guaranteed income in your total income is increasing. So it needs to think a bit more about the economic and financial impacts and follow-ups to understand that basic income is not just giving in the society and then everything is brilliant. It needs, of course, the understanding of financing, and that this amount of money that otherwise creates inflation has to be pulled back, and there are several models. And it has to be understood that we are not enemies. The entrepreneurs, how they are, I don't know, are not the enemies. The rich are not the enemies. The poor are not the enemies. We have to stop with this differentiation of we are the good, those are the bad. It might be right, but it's right from every position and every direction. So unconditional basic income for everybody, universal, means that we understand human being as one. And that means also that the question of economy needs to be renewed, but with the idea of an unconditional basic income, not with all the other old ideas. And to say that's so horrible when work is subsidized. Why? It's great. It's great. We need a new understanding of work and payment. Payment is above, payment is appreciation. Payment is not blackmailing, is not pressure.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a lot of this does come down to the implementation. Who gets the UBI? Is it truly universal? And if it is, will have natural economic forces that will become more or less equalizers. And I think at this moment we have about 10 minutes to the hour. I think if everyone wants to, we can stay on till about 1:15. So to give us about 20 more minutes. And I would like to ask some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. And one of the questions has to do with this idea of the morality of basic income in terms of solving some of these other questions like growth, decommoditization, and regeneration. And the question is, can we trust in this relationship between income security and ethics? And I think the broader question of ethics at a societal level, how do we be sustainable and modify behavior with a basic income? Does anyone want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. So first of all, this question really is how much do we trust each other, which is really the central question of UBI, anyways. And as one example of kind of degrowth effect is that there was an unconditional cash transfer program in Indonesia that resulted in a 30% less deforestation. And so, that impact was that the people needed to go out and deforest in order to earn income to live. And then once they no longer needed to do that, they didn't go and do that. And you saw similar impact in actually Namibia too, where illegal hunting dropped dramatically. It dropped 95%. And so there's kind of this form of work that people really don't want to do, but they feel that they have to. Like, I don't think people really want to hurt the environment in these large ways. And I think a lot of it is because they feel that they have to in order to survive. So if we unconditionally guarantee the right to life, then people will, I think, choose to do less harmful things. I trust people to do that. And we see these kind of impacts where we do kind of touch upon UBI. And I also think that there's a difference in consumer behavior as well. I think what they're called inferior goods are a good example. So an inferior good is something that people really only buy because they can only afford that. And if they can't afford better stuff, they will no longer buy that. And so an example of that is we're creating these really cheap things and in just massive quantities, and then they fall apart and then we throw them away. And that's that. And we do it because they're so cheap. I think if people had unconditional basic income and they were able to afford better stuff, they would choose that. And also there would be reason to actually create more of that stuff because people want it. And so then let's say people would buy fewer pairs of shoes that last longer instead of buying these things that just fall apart over and over again. So I think that's another part of it. And the third part of it too is that, again, when we talk about the importance of implementation, the taxation that we use, that we tie to the basic income program as part of it, that can change incentives and behaviors as well. So like, I think a carbon tax is a great example of something that could be utilized that would be, good for the environment. It's something that's very necessary in order to combat climate change. And if we, make it more expensive to fill up our atmosphere with greenhouse gases, then we'll do less of that. And it'll alter people's behavior so that, let's say, they'll drive less, they'll use less of oil-based, they'll shrink their carbon footprint in order to increase the amount of basic income they receive by reducing their tax burdens. Like, that's the kind of smart tax adjustment that should go with basic income, I think, the kind of Pagovian taxes. So I think altogether, given that picture, that we can really make kind of degrowth and more sustainable world and economy more likely with UBI.
I think, Michelle, you wanted to comment on Scott.
No, it was just a question. I would like the references to the Indonesian example, because that's very powerful in terms of linking UBI to ecology. Because one of the left critiques I hear a lot is you will just subsidize people to consume more, and that's not what we need. So this kind of examples are really interesting because that's kind of a counterexample where you see the opposite happening, and so that fear is not borne out. So it would really help if you can share the the URL or the reference on that particular example.
Right, so we've picked another question from the audience, which is: basic income will work only in mature societies where people can be constructively autonomous. In other cases, it would drive majority to infantilism like happened in the Soviet Union.
Anyone want to comment on that one?
I'm happy to comment again. I don't want to take up too much of the oxygen here.
Yeah,
but,
maybe quickly, Scott. Herbert and Enno are also there. Yeah, good. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's just any comparisons to Soviet Union, they not understanding what Soviet Union is and what basic income was or is, and that again, you just don't see any of that in the experimental evidence. Like over and over again, for example, you see that basic income leads to increased entrepreneurship, and so I feel that's the exact opposite of infantilism. If you actually receive starting capital, you use that capital. People just don't get it and then do nothing and then be treated like children or whatever. No, they get it and then they do what it is that they feel is important to do, and that could be creating something new. It could be doing something that's unpaid, that's valuable, like um, Michelle was talking about, and as far as P2P stuff goes, free software movement, like that's what you see people actually do. You just don't see this kind of thing that people are afraid of.
Herbert, please.
Thank you. Scott has dealt with the comparison with the Soviet Union, so I don't need to go there any further. But I picked on the chats that Gary and Caroline raised an important issue, and they understood what I meant with the linkages, and they pointed out that universal basic services, public services, accessible services, are crucial alongside a universal basic income. And these are the kind of linkages we need to do. We need to look at the structural inequality and base the universal basic income into that context, so that it can make that difference. And Scott has outlined very clearly at a personal level why it is emancipatory and why it provides some space for people to make that choice, like you said so clearly, the power to say no. And I think in that context, that's where the strength of a universal basic income. I don't want to spend much time there. I largely disagree with Enno's point earlier. I think it misses social reality in many parts of the globe, but there is no doubt that a basic income grant is part of that process of change, of moving towards a new society, of a post-capitalist society that's not destructive to the planet as the one we're seeing now by and large. And I think on that we are all agreed. Thank you very much.
Enno, I think you raised the hand immediately when the Soviet Union came up. I think you also want to respond to her.
There's so much more now. So I think for each and every country, it needs their individual path. So I'm not so sure about mature societies. That's not a term for me. So for example, when I was in the US, the Native Americans understood basic income immediately. Is that a mature society? And I think other societies, which we would call not mature, understand that. And maybe, yeah, they need to have a different path to go to it. But again, for countries like Germany or Switzerland or what, I suggest again not to have services, unconditional services, because this always creates paternalism again, doing good things for others, deciding what you should do. And that was a discussion, for example, in Japan. They want to do that, public services, guaranteed services, but not independency of the people, not cash. Not do what you think is valuable, do what I think is valuable. You need education, you get it for free. You need that because I think that's good for you. And the Indian project made so clear that also in India there are social security benefits with conditions, strings attached. And this is always not practical, and that always makes that this don't work. So again, I think it's very difficult to understand the idea of an unconditional basic income, universal unconditional basic income. We often talk about that and think, oh yeah, everything is clear, and then we start with poverty and so on. Or what I said, and I saw in the chat, yes, I'm saying rich are not the bad people. There are bad people everywhere, and there are brilliant people in that and that and that class. So we need analysis of classes, of course, but we need the end of class struggling, because then those are the losers who don't have the power. And unconditional basic income means power for everybody.
Herbert, you had something to say. You want to quickly chime in here?
I think it's nice to give others a chance now. I think Enno really completely missed the point we made, but I saw from the chat that others picked it up. So I'd like to give others a chance to contribute. Thanks.
All right.
Wonderful. Great. Well, the next question we have from the audience, and this will be the last one before we wrap up, it has to do with the funding of a universal basic income. And there's been many ideas. Some of them are like creating new currencies for UBI. Here's one that asks about using licensing fees from resource extraction and things like that to fund UBI instead of the federal government's doing it directly. Let's speak a little bit to the issue of funding for UBI and whether or not some of these new crypto technologies could do it with some conditions, like, you can only spend it on green food, green things, or with other alternative resources. Who would like to start?
Well,
Oh,
I'm happy to go with that one because it's my opinion that if we issued universal basic income and special purpose currencies for different types of purchases, everybody needs food, everybody needs some level of energy, everybody needs to be able to express their creativity, everybody needs maybe some things to spend with local businesses. We could actually interrupt the idea that UBI would inherently be inflationary, because if you weren't spending just plain old single purpose cash on as your basic income, you could potentially raise everybody's standard of living, encourage the sectors that we need, discourage the kind of carbon consumption that we're unfortunately so good at doing, and have a better society. So that would be my 2 cents on that question. Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for designing currencies that just give everyone what they need and avoid some of the negative effects that might occur. Maruka, do you have any comment on this matter?
Yeah, maybe I'm all the time thinking here that as I said last week, I think that we have lots of bureaucracy nowadays, at least here in Finland. And I think that we beat the beaten, so that's bad. And that's not kind of like respecting the people and humanity. We have lots of bureaucracy, especially for those who are in need of widely with the services and benefits. And that's really bad. I think that we need to lose the bureaucracy. And here in Finland, we are now thinking about of 2 solutions to this, not basic income, but we talk about basic account, basic social security account, and that would give people more freedom. The idea is that we give these customers with a few conditions, maybe this account that we put on the money, which is, for example, a lot of money, 6,000 euros or something like that. And they can do withdrawals, for example, maximum 650 euros per month and live on that. And so this is kind of like the same idea as the basic income had that, but they get the total control of the money for themselves, and we lose the bureaucracy. It could be very automatically granted this money to these people, and we could attach some of the conditions, because of course the unconditionality is the problem, of course, when we talk about here and the politicians think about how to shape the social security benefits. I think that we could finance that by combining some of the basic benefits nowadays, for example, unemployment basic benefits and student allowances, and then grant this account to these people who can handle that. But on the side, we need to figure out how to give better services and positive services to these people who are in need of services. I think that we need to figure out that side, because the money is not good for everybody in every situation. I think that.
Michelle, I think you wanted to comment.
Yes, so I'm also a blockchain observer, and so I see a lot of crypto initiatives that want to initiate the basic income. And I also heard Enno say in the beginning that it's not the government that should do it; it's the people, or some kind of remark, which I'm not sure what it actually means in practice. So I just want to say that if we have this whole series of bottom-up initiatives. That is in itself a factor of inequality, because you'll have, successful communities, not so successful communities, people living in rich places, people living in poor spaces. So if you look, for example, the history of Social Security, it was self-organized labor, which did that in the UK, but only 20% of the workers had access to it. So you really needed the welfare reforms of 1945 or a bit after that said this is a human right for everybody who lives here, right? So this is the issue, I think, with basic income as well. And I think the unconditionality of basic income actually is a guarantee that it doesn't mean a bureaucracy. Because why would you need a bureaucracy, especially now with digital services? You could give everybody an account and just put it on the account, right? So there's very minimal bureaucracy involved. So that's my question. I think, like, well, if not the public sphere, if not the government, who else would do it in a way that guarantees that everybody has access to the same and equal amount? This is, I think, a huge concern that I have.
Scott.
Yeah, I just want to chime in and connect the affordability question to the universal services question. Because I think one of the most important things to recognize is that the status quo is not free and it comes with a lot of costs. Poverty is extremely expensive. Here in the US, it's trillions of dollars. Child poverty itself exceeds $1 trillion a year. And chronic stress is extremely expensive, insecurity, instability. These things cost all of us actually a lot of resources. And an example of that is through the healthcare system. So 80 to 90% of health outcomes are from the social determinants of health. And so it's really important to have a universal healthcare system. But without UBI, a lot of what you're spending resources on is treating the downstream effects of the lack of basic income. So if you introduce a basic income, you're going to save resources that would otherwise be going into these universal services programs like universal healthcare. And also you're going to be making them more effective. Like education is an example too. So much of education, the results of it come from the environment at home. So, if you're a hungry kid, you're not focused on the education, you're going to have worse outcomes from the education. So it makes more sense that, hey, if we want to make sure the education works to the best that it can, then we want to make sure that we reduce poverty enough, that reduce insecurity enough so that children can actually learn and then come out of these better. So basic income is a foundation, and everything that we build aside from that is built on top of it. And that's the problem right now, is we have the system where we're building all these different things, but it's not on a foundation. So it's wasteful. It leads to poorer outcomes. And that's a problem. We're just missing that foundation. And I'd also just point out too that it's really important that unconditionality is preserved. So I don't like these ideas of, let's say, creating something that encourages someone to do something and punishes someone for not doing something. The UBI should be absolutely, cash available to everyone, but it doesn't mean that you can't do something above and outside of that. So let's say food stamps was initially, when we first created it, you paid money, and let's say for every dollar you got a food stamp that was worth $2 worth of food. So like you can use your UBI to pay for food stamps for, healthy foods instead of the existing program where you're paying for food at all. And then that way you would amplify that and incentivize that in a way that doesn't punish people, and it actually encourages it. So that's the way that I would prefer to build these systems, is that you're encouraging something instead of punishing something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the idea of really highlighting the cost of all of these social negatives. The poverty, the healthcare, all of these things are huge costs that UBI could help address. And I hope you can provide us with some links that will give people some evidence for that when they have their personal debates about UBI. It would be very helpful. I think we're gonna wrap up here, right? And
yeah, it's like always, time flies when it becomes really interesting. But I think we had a wonderful hour with you guys. We have to wrap up, and we come to our last questions. Maybe each of the panelists can answer it in one or two sentences very quickly.
What do you think the audience can do to further the conversation about UBI? That's one answer we'd like to have, like an action item for audience members. And then finally, what do you think is a final point that you'd like to make that you think is something that's really not brought forward in this conversation? Just 2 bullet points, each of you, kind of a fire round. Let's go. Let's start with Maruka.
What everybody can do to, increase the discussion. You can, pass the link from this discussion on and see the last week's discussion. It was really interesting. And I thank you that you arranged this. I'd be happy to attend again in the future if you have these kind of discussions and webinars. And the other thing, what's the point? I think that I'm thinking that we need to take steps forwards into the future, but we need to see the world that we are going in. We do need to have a higher 20-year or 30-year goal that we can, go forward into the right direction with these social security benefits and social services and health services, and combine these services and benefits better with each other and help the people. I always think about that. If I can do something good, one little thing per day for customers, like I'm very happy and I feel meaningful and important person here. I think that's the most important thing. Everybody needs to feel important.
Yeah,
thanks.
for sure. Herbert?
The critical point is to really hammer what Scott has alluded to, that the current status quo, the levels of inequality, the level of environmental and social destruction is absolutely not sustainable. And that the costs associated with the UIB and the benefits to be derived from them, it's undoubtedly proven. I'm not, because of time, I'm not going into the Namibian case, but Scott alluded to something as simple as illegal hunting and illegal collecting of firewood declined immediately. Crime rates dropped by 50% in that area immediately. School results improved by 90%. More than double the people could use the local health clinic because they could pay this measly $5 that they had to pay to make use of the public service there. And that's what I mean, the embeddedness of it all. And if we drive that point home, that it's a relatively small investment with a huge potential of social benefits to come, I think that is what I would hammer on. Thank you.
Enno, can I ask you to make one action item a great one point?
Yeah, just in addition to what Herbert said and Maruka said, I think one point is also that you can think further on this idea, and then you experience how lively this idea is. So it's not an abstract idea, it's not a plan, a construction. It has life in itself. And all the questions which were rising up in this discussion, for example, and more and more and more, you can think about that. And then it comes from itself that you are interested in more discussions or spreading the idea and discussing. And every party where you are starting with unconditional basic income is more vibrant. It's not so boring then. I think it's fun, and it has to be also fun, not just the serious points, but that this is already our life. It's not coming when the basic income is coming. And so I would like to mention that it is fulfilling and makes sense to think about and to act for this new idea.
Michelle, could you come next?
Yes, this is a question maybe for another time, but so there is a proposal by Yanis Varoufakis to fund the basic income through the commons, which I find appealing and interesting. So the basic idea is that there's these common resources which either belong to the state or are privatized, but really to consider their surplus as what is funding a second income. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the 1930s, there was a movement for binary economics. And the whole idea was that you would have a wage from the market and a wage, from the state. And I think that's an interesting idea. So something to explore maybe in terms of funding, where would it come through taxation? Would it come from through another we didn't really answer that question, but it's in a lot of people's mind. They worry about the cost of it.
Thank you, Michelle. Any action item coming from you for our audience members?
Well, yeah, exploring the link between the commons and the basic income is something that interests me, and anybody else who's interested, yeah, that would be
Okay,
something
keep on,
to explore.
keep on exploring. And finally, we have Scott. Scott, your final word.
Yeah, I'd just like to hammer home the point that this is basic income is a human right. And it's a human right that once we start denying people, everyone will be better off. So the fact that we're denying it is making everyone worse off. This is if what you need to live can be withheld from you, then do you actually have the right to life? And I think it's important that people recognize that no one should be able to stand between you and what you need to live. And it's just nonsense that we're withholding what we need to live from each other in a way that makes things so worse, as far as worse health outcomes, worse crime, worse education, just everything. And I want people to understand that this is like a positive sum change that will really be transformative in a way that even people whose, let's say, their taxes go up, they're going to be existing in a better, more functioning, more innovative, more creative, happier society, and they'll be better off for that as well. As far as action items to go, I first of all, that's the question for everyone to be asking, is what can they do to help? And I think that's a very personal question. And there's just, again, people are very creative. So just even try to figure out, what can you come up with? What creative things can you do to help? Personally, in your communities, more recently, there's the ability to, say in the US, urge your mayor to become part of the Mayors for Guaranteed Income project, to get a pilot going in there. There are actually city councils around the country now voting for their own pilots, and you can help with that. There's a lot of different of these city level, even statewide kind of things that you can get going, and I think that's really important to make that happen. Like, so example, in Oregon, there's going to be an initiative where it'll be the People's Rebate for Oregon, where everyone will get $750 as their universal income per year there in Oregon, which will follow Alaska, which has had this in 1982. There's a lot of things you can do at the community level, and there's even stuff you can do now in the cryptocurrency space. Like, Proof of Humanity is an interesting project that was launched recently, with around, like, I believe it's 5,000 people now who are receiving this crypto UBI. And there's just, again, people are very creative. Ask that question, and I hope that you can find something great out there. Like, this is what I came up with, is like writing and advocating for it. But there's so many things people can do.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, every one of you, to be here to participate in this conversation. I think I do remember, like, 10 years ago, when UBI kind of started to become become discussed, and I saw sometimes complete blank eyes, and it's so great, that we can just enlarge the discussion. This is, I guess, how we just shift our minds, and this becomes larger. And through these discussions, I think we can grow, and we can, sort of create the movement and create the shift we need in our society. And yes, we do need some serious shifts in the planet. And when the new financial paradigms coming alive, we have to design it to include everyone. Absolutely everyone this time.
Yep. And we want to also thank everyone who participated today. And if you have continued questions, please we'll leave the chat open for a while. We will save the questions and respond to each of them to the best of our abilities through email back to you. Keep thinking about UBI. And we are from Pot of Gold. If you are interested, we're looking for our own UBI on Patreon, just like Scott, or at the Pot of Gold account. And we will also want to appreciate our co-hosts, our co-organizers with Festa and Vermonters for a New Economy. And Gwen, thank you for your gracious support as well, and organizing abilities.